and there's no thing locked there. It's just kind of an accordion thing, and there's no, for some reason you would think if it's locked on your nose, you wouldn't, but if it's locked on my nose, it's wrong. Yeah. Weird.
Well, I got some questions from Catherine, and I went to print them out this morning, and it told me I had updates, and it's been updating all morning, so technical challenges, but I will do my best to cover those quickly, and then the bulk of what I wanted to share had to do with a question on Council for the Homeless, and the information I learned there, and I know some of that was I think conveyed, but let me see if I can pull up Catherine's questions here. And I didn't have a chance with the memorial last week, I didn't have a chance to write up a formal response to the questions like I have in the past, but I thought we could just at least talk through them and I could shoot from the hip. Number one, did God evolve or change from the time of the Old Testament with his punishing sinful man to the God who sent Jesus to cover our sins in the New Testament? Does God still intervene in the same way that he did in the Old Testament, or is the Holy Spirit now the one who comes to us? Tricky question. I've been going around and around on this, what the right theological answer is. But Scripture says God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So in theory, God doesn't change. Then you have stories like Abraham saying, well, what about these folks? There are a few good folks here. Can you spare the city over 100 good folks? How about 50 good folks? How about 10 good folks? And God changes his mind. So there are examples of God actually changing as well, or at least changing a decision. I don't know that God's character changes, but maybe God is persuaded in that instance. I personally have a really hard time with punishing God, even in the Old Testament. And one thing that I've been trying to do is read Jewish commentary when it comes to the Old Testament. Because I think a lot of times as Christians, we jump to Jesus. We jump to the New Testament and are strongly influenced by St. Paul's writings and understanding of who God is. And that was hundreds of years after a lot of those original stories in the Old Testament were written. So why were they originally written? I think you can get a whole different set of answers and wisdom and insight. Did God change? The thing that comes most to mind is Paul writing to the Romans that the law reveals sin. And I'm thinking, if God didn't punish in the Old Testament, would we have a frame of reference for what grace means? I don't know that we would really understand grace or appreciate grace unless the law was there to reveal our need for Jesus to come. Again, so many different ways. So where did this question come from? What are your thoughts on this? Where are you coming from on this one?
Basically, what came up was because he did change his mind. You see in the Bible many times where he changed his mind. Oh yeah, I'm going to kill them all. No, I won't, because you prayed or whatever. But my human response is that God got tired of making covenants that they never kept and needed a whole new plan. But from what you say, I can see where, God knows all and always has known all, so maybe that was his plan all along. I don't know. But sometimes the Bible seems to contradict, but not necessarily, because he's always the same. He's always God, but that doesn't mean he can't change his mind.
Mm-hmm. I think there's also, in my mind, I can't help but wonder if there isn't a cultural influence in the writing of Scripture. Those original stories where the tribes understood warfare. And so they understood God acting through warfare and blessing their tribe when they won a battle. I've been reading more recently about how we have to be careful not to let American patriotism influence our faith. And the one that's really struck me for a long time is the example of family values, that the evangelical church really pushes American family values, that it's the nuclear family. And I'm thinking, Jesus wasn't married. He said, let the kids come to me, but he didn't say, have a lot of kids. St. Paul said, get married only if you have to. So I'm thinking, in terms of looking at what Jesus modeled and what the early church was taught, how do we get to these family values that are so strong? That's an American value, I think, more than a scriptural value. Now, granted, there's the garden and God creating the couple, and that we're made to procreate, but I see that more in our secular culture than I do in scripture per se.
I was listening to NPR coming up, and it was startling. These two men had gone overseas to look at the prison systems. And their prison systems are so different than ours because they're focusing on rehabilitation.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thought was that it's a failure if they're not trained to do something else. That concept of being in there for life or whatever. And they had taken some prison officials from here over there, and they're talking about, well, what about the political ramification of somebody being released and then something bad happening again, like what happened with Dukakis and Willie Norton or whatever his name was, and they said, well, that just isn't, we do not allow the public to determine, their vengeance, their requirement for vengeance isn't part of our system. Our system is to rehabilitate those people and get them back to society. And if there are slip-ups, there are slip-ups, but it is not purely punishment. And I thought that was amazing, how freeing to be focused on helping someone get to a better place in life and to be a contributing member rather than thinking I'm here for my whole life. There is no alternative to just this kind of day, which, speaks to me really of how we feel, or, to be a Christian is to focus on that improvement. You're going to make mistakes today, but hopefully tomorrow, with prayer and goodwill and whatever, not to carry that grudge, to be condemning.
Although I do think there has to be consequences in our society for doing things that are hurtful to other people and that pull down our society.
What she's saying is they don't subscribe to that idea.
Well, their focus is on
Right.
retraining. Yes, there is a punishment. You will be incarcerated, but
Right, but it's not the focus.
I think in Scandinavia, they do that. They will actually have murderers out walking about with everybody else because they've worked with them so much and have a bit more trust.
It was on 60 Minutes several
I
years
saw,
ago.
yeah, I saw that too.
Okay, and what strikes me is that I don't think it's had, the fact that it was brought out, hasn't really had an effect on how we
Right.
handle the penal system.
Well, I think cultural is a big thing because look at Afghanistan. They're still very tribal. They're still in the Old Testament, and we couldn't win a war there because we don't really embrace an understanding of what that is or what it would take.
I think it's really tough to separate the cultural influence from the truth of Scripture, I guess, and trying to get at what is the Spirit trying to communicate in the Scripture versus what do we hear because we are so steeped in American contemporary 21st century culture. That's so hard to delineate, and I think why did God smite this tribe and that tribe, and why was God so vengeful and punishing? It's a tough one. It's a tough one. It leads to one of the other questions in here about, I think the last question is about the sins of the father revisited on the subsequent generations. And that is a troubling concept, that why should the children pay for the mistakes of parents? And I kind of see that as natural consequence. That in grad school we went back just 3 generations and we doing a genogram. So it was a family tree going back just 3 generations. But then you have to start marking different kinds of relationships, like who was estranged. And you realize that a mother and son were estranged in this generation. Oh, and it was the same in the previous generation. Oh, and it went back a generation. There's like this weird tension between mothers and sons that's passed down. There hasn't been a model for a healthy relationship. Mental health issues, substance abuse issues are known to be hereditary. But then you get into things like hobbies, music, an interest in music, that gets passed down. And I think sometimes we pass down more than we realize. And if somebody makes poor choices and models that, kids are going to follow in their footsteps. There's a probability, a higher chance. And I see that more as a natural consequence and not God trying to punish. Again, I don't see God as this vengeful, wrathful, punishing God, but I do see that there are effects for the choices we make.
Although one of the things that brought that to us is that we were reading the part about where God says to Ahab, okay, I see you've repented, and so I'm going to forgive you, but I'm going to punish you generations to come.
Mm.
That was the part that kind of got us.
Mm-hmm.
But that was Old Testament.
Yep.
It was Beverly recommended, or Beverly talked about reading this book, and so I started reading this book. Man, and just the opening, I was just blown away.
I don't remember.
Bonhoeffer, you told me you were reading Bonhoeffer, but
I don't remember.
talking about law, when you talk about the law and the and Christ and forgiveness, they were talking about how Martin Luther said, "Sin boldly," and so what does that mean, But what it came down to that I really found helpful was that yes, we have the law in this generation, in the New Testament, we have the law, but then we get forgiven. So it's kind of like, well, then what's the point of the law? Well, the point of the law is to know that we've fallen short and turn more to Christ. I thought that was really amazing.
And Luther's not instructing us to make bad choices.
Oh, no.
Sin boldly is not an instruction, but it's an acknowledgement. Own the fact that you're a sinner and trust even more fully in the grace of God. That's the rest of Luther's
It was
book.
Catherine that's reading Bonhoeffer.
Oh, it was Catherine, it wasn't you?
I couldn't remember that.
Oh, yeah. No, it's Life Together. It's about
okay.
the community, and
Yeah.
wow, there's so many people in there, and so many philosophies, and outlooks, I guess, not so much but outlooks that, they tell you this person's name, what they say, man, you start researching, it's like, holy smokes, this guy had, it just blows my mind how many thoughts are out there that I've never considered.
Yeah.
And
And
things
that's
to think
kind of
about.
been the explosion of joy that we've experienced in Bible study.
Right,
It really is.
it is, yeah.
It's really cool.
One of the other questions was about the ravens and an unclean animal bringing the blessing or bringing the bread. Thoughts on that? Tell me more about the
Yeah, I remember that one.
conversation in there.
When he
Catherine's
ran away because they were seeking him.
He was in Cherokee.
No, I remember
Yes.
that part, I don't remember us having a question.
Oh.
Right, I did.
I don't
Well, it
remember
was
questions.
considered,
I kind of-
the raven was
understood it.
considered an unclean animal or
Right.
something.
Right.
Yeah.
And so why did he choose to
The
send the ravens?
ravens to do that.
Pardon?
It was maybe why did he choose the ravens
Yes.
to deliver that food?
Yes.
I thought she addressed that. Huh.
I hear that as a reminder that God can work through anyone and anything. And I get annoyed with Christians who only go to a Christian dentist, go to a Christian mechanic, and I'm thinking, good things happen outside of the Christian community. God can work through all kinds of things, and to narrow your focus that much, I think you're really limiting your experience. You're limiting God. You're putting God in a box. And one of my personal favorite examples was I ended up giving a ride to somebody. I was heading down to the Bay Area, so it was a long car ride. She identified as a bisexual dominatrix, and she was a friend of a friend, and I'm like, I'm giving a ride, okay. It ended up to be a powerful car ride. And I heard God working through that conversation in this weird way. I'm like, God is speaking to me through a bisexual dominatrix who is, totally agnostic, not a person of faith. But I felt like I was hearing something I needed to hear. And it was so funny that the message came that way. But that would be a message, that.
So when
I
I
didn't
said
know that about her. She just tell you right
Yeah,
off
oh
the
yeah, no, she, very open about her
I just
identity.
don't
And,
tell people about sexuality.
no,
when
I
meet
know,
them.
yeah.
So what dominant?
She was looking for customers.
Yeah. It was a long car ride, and there was an interesting conversation.
So that last part, dominant. What is that mean?
Dominatrix?
Yeah.
She is
The
somebody,
whips and the leather,
yeah,
girl, the whips and the
yeah,
leather.
yeah, into power play and power
I
games
see.
in relation to
Okay.
Power and
sexuality.
submission.
Yeah.
Oh.
So that, it was an interesting car ride. Unexpected, but
That's true, though. I've had some conversations with what I would consider an unusual person, and it's true. I think you can learn. You learn.
Yeah.
Well, you kind of get out of your frame of reference.
Yeah, because we can be stuck there a lot.
But when we expect God only to work in certain ways, we're limiting God. And
That's true.
I see that in the local church because these people in this local church go out, some of my friends, and I love them dearly, but their church culture is that they really only recognize people from their own church.
Yeah.
And so I can be out with them and they can run into someone that's from their church, and that person won't even acknowledge me, but they will go and shake the hands of my friend and say, God be with you, peace be with you. And it's like, they're just like so insular. They're so set in their ways. It's like they don't think the rest of us even have a God, I think, or our God
You should
is
tell
not
them that.
important. I do. I share my faith with my friend all the time, although she is not of that. She's very different from the norm. But I mean, my neighbors, they've gotten used to us now, and they're a little more friendly. But it's hard to break into that, to be seen as a person and not just an outsider.
That can happen even in any church,
Yes, oh yes.
any community, any church.
That's what Jesus was battling. One of the reasons he was so controversial, he healed the wrong people.
Yeah.
He spoke with women publicly, and that was taboo. That was against the law of the day. He healed the Syrophoenician woman. She's a foreigner. You don't go near a foreigner; they're unclean. And he healed a Syrophoenician woman. So I think it's been the inclination forever for people to isolate and stay safe with their own tribe, and it still happens today.
Oh yes.
And Jesus specifically confronted that it's not just the men who have power. It's not just the Jews who are a people of hope and receive God's blessing. And he blew the doors open. And we're still struggling with it here thousands of years later. Let's see, I'm looking at these questions. I should best study the Old Testament. Honestly, I've been finding some really neat commentary, Jewish commentary online. And I'll type Jewish commentary on whatever passage or whatever story. And I'll get some listings and just kind of read through them. But there's some good Jewish commentary, at least what I find interesting and scholarly, and I don't feel like there's a strong agenda, but oftentimes it's the same kind of stuff that I try to look for in Christian material with, this is the understanding of the Greek word there, and of course in the Old Testament with the Hebrew word.
Yeah, I like when you do that in the
And
sermons.
the cultural stuff that back in the day, this was what was going on, and this is what the people were thinking, and how they saw the world around them, and why it was controversial. The Jewish commentary that I look for often has those same kind of qualities. And again, I often feel like I'm blown away. I have these real epiphanies when I read this stuff because it's a different perspective. Christians assume Jesus. We jump to that answer. We jump to Jesus. We jump to our interpretation of Jesus, especially through Paul, of how we should live, and we miss out on the original context. And there's just a real richness there. I don't have a good set of Jewish commentaries. Most of the commentaries I have are Christian. Most of what I look at in my personal library is Christian oriented, but there's lots of good stuff out there. Letting God, relinquishing the people to the evil of their sinful that's kind of, there's several variations of kind of the same question. Talk about Matthew 10, 35 and 36 on page 161, paragraph 1 of our study. She talks about a need to distance ourselves from people we share a relationship, whether cultural or spiritual, to step away from those who believe as we do, but have become apathetic or lukewarm. Thoughts?
Well, that was based on Matthew, or that was part of Matthew, where she quotes Matthew on that,
Mm-hmm.
and says, I came to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's enemies will be members of his household.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was just so divisive and so unloving,
Mm-hmm.
in the way that we read it.
Yeah.
Or the way that
I think what we felt though in the long run was that in your family, or which in a broader sense of family,
Mm-hmm.
that you need to voice your faith.
Mm-hmm.
And they may be pulling a different direction, and you voice your faith and you don't follow them in that direction. Let them know where you stand. I felt like that's what it meant. It's not, and you don't turn against family completely, but you let them know what your faith is and how you feel.
Well, Jesus didn't outright condemn Judas in terms of thinking who his community was in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
He spent the last day of his life with his disciples. The Last Supper, he's gathered with them, knowing what Judas is going to do, but he doesn't smite Judas because Jesus is not deterred from his mission, from what God brought him into the world to do. And I hear it more as a warning. I come to bring fire to the earth, and father against mother, son against, it's the division. I really struggle with that division language, but
that was, by the way, that was Catherine's question, and I remember clearly that her big thing was to step away from, and that really bothered her, to step away from. So I just mentioned it because it was a question, that was the part.
It was just last night I was reading a quote from someone, and I can't remember who it was, of course, but they talked about the very same thing. Sometimes it's really important to distance yourself from everyone and to look inward. And I thought, that's what we've been talking about.
I think there's a lot of wisdom in the recovery community, and one of the things, is recognize your influences, your friendships, and there are times when the people around you are not healthy. They continue to keep you in unhealthy situations and encourage poor choices, and I hear that language about division being, there may come a time when you recognize that you're not in the same place. And I don't think we need to create those divisions or be hostile toward each other, but our passion, our commitment, our faith will lead us in ways that go different from other places, other people. I struggle with the way things are unfolding. I think politically, our nation is very divided. We all see that. But how do we handle those differences of opinion? We used to have differences of opinion and still be able to talk to each other.
Yeah.
And now it's so bitter. And that's what I struggle with. Jesus challenged the Pharisees. He challenged the religious people. But he didn't burn those bridges. we were just recently talking about the rich young ruler, the guy that had trouble following, because Jesus said, sell your stuff and share with the poor. And the guy struggled because he had a lot of stuff. He wasn't ready to do that. But it's kind of undecided. The man walked away and struggled. Jesus didn't condemn him. The harshest words he spoke were to the Pharisees. You brood of vipers, who take the widow's riches. Since a woman couldn't own property, the temple would take possession of the property and control that. So they're swooping up all the real estate and controlling it. And Jesus is like, what are you doing? You're manipulating your power. You're manipulating your position. You're misusing your power. And rather than helping people, you're taking advantage and lining your own pockets. So his most harsh words were to the religious community and to the people that, he was presumably, king of the Jews. These are the Jewish religious teachers. So his harshest words were to his own, in a sense. And his most gracious words were to the outsiders, inviting and welcoming them. So that division, I really struggle with that division language. And I recognize it's there. But I think it's be true to your own conscience and the Spirit working in you. And be aware when people are pulling you away from what you feel is right.
Sunday you had the sermon on that going home. I was listening to NPR again, and they were having I think I maybe already told you, it was Freakonomics, and the person had talked about the fact that we have moved from discussions to contempt.
Yeah.
And once you put that tone in there where you're not respecting the person, I mean, you can hear a lot of things, but once you kind of villainize the other person, you don't have any place to go in terms of discussion.
Yeah.
It's kind of, then it sides and you're pushed apart.
There's a lot to even just a basic conversation. Are you hearing what the other person is saying, or are you anticipating your response? And especially if you're anticipating a retaliation. Like, how can I get it back? How can I make my point? You're not hearing what they're saying and really processing and trying to understand that point of view. You're trying to figure out how to win. And that's where I come back to that adage, healing is more important than victory. And healing is more important than victory. So often we're focused on winning and beating the other, culturally, we're, power, domination, winning. That's more important than anything else.
And that's stressed so much,
And
so
that-
much
In our
in
society.
this country.
Yeah.
I wonder how much the internet and social media has to do with that, because it seemed like before we had that and people could hide behind not being visible when they said something nasty and ugly, it kind of like created this thing that wasn't there before. You know what I mean? People, if they were going to say something ugly to you, they had to say it to your face. And so all of a sudden people are able to say online just ugly things and, divisive things. And I wonder how much that's, in a very subtle way, affected the way that we communicate now.
Oh, it definitely, I think definitely has affected how we communicate. I remember thinking way back, people say nasty things on the phone that they wouldn't say it to your face. And now it's the whole internet, the whole world.
Everything. You could say the sun came up this morning and somebody would have something really ugly to say to you about that. Oh, the sun came up, but, you know what I mean? It's just like, really? Yeah.
Either way, I don't think it's affected us, Rick.
It's changed our culture, that's for sure.
There isn't a lot of value for respect of people. Right? There used to be more value for treating people with respect. You can disagree, but you respect the person you're talking to. And now there's just no respect. The only thing that's respected in our culture is power.
Yeah, they don't respect integrity anymore. It used to be that people would be ashamed if they got caught ripping somebody off. Now, they're not.
Yep.
I mean, look at,
That was a pride in it.
I don't wanna name names, but there's people in our political sphere who are famous for making it by shoving somebody else to the ground. And in the past, that would have made you ashamed, you know? And it's like, no, that's, you know, all these shows like that, like, you know, like the Survivor. I always hated Survivor because it's all about shoving somebody else's side. I don't get it.
Manipulating and dominance.
Yeah.
Well, I want to make sure we have time to run through these. So I know the question came up about what to do about homeless. So there was.
So do you want to give me copies?
Sure. You have one?
No, I didn't. I'll give it away. I'll write it later.
Okay, so.
So coincidentally, there was a meeting scheduled with Laura Ellsworth, a Zoom meeting with the local Lutheran Vancouver area pastor, Laura Ellsworth, who works for the Council for the Homeless, and it was just it was a lot about the majority of what she talked about was just informing the rest of us about what's going on, what the current efforts are, what the focus is, what the need is. There's a lot of basic education around the topic. So let's see. The first thing that folks have to do is call the housing hotline. They enter the system. That's kind of the primary entrance. My wife is a social worker for the state, and she talks about this is the gateway. This is the way people get into the system. So in terms of housing and a place to live, the first thing is to call the housing hotline. They're assessed what their need is, whether it's emergency, which would be a critical kind of condition, a really emergent kind of thing. They need housing tonight. Or whether it's just short term, you know, somebody is in transition, needs a place for a week or even a month. Or whether it's long term, there are different options with rental assistance, but people must be homeless, car camping or couch surfing, with nowhere to go. So the effort of the Council of the for the Homeless is to prevent the growth of the homeless or homeless prevention. And that's why they do rental assistance. If they can tide somebody over for a while and prevent them from going homeless, that's a key priority. She mentioned that the county has given out $25 million in rental assistance through the pandemic. And I asked where those funds came from, if they were local or state or primarily federal, and she said it's primarily federal. But we've all heard about the stimulus money. This isn't specifically stimulus, it's more in keeping with the Payroll Protection Act, where it was preventing damage. I think stimulus is trying to keep our economy alive and promote the growth of the economy, whereas this is more damage control. They are responsible for conducting an annual point-in-time head count. So once a year, they try to figure out what exactly the need is. How many people are homeless? How has it changed from the previous year, and what's going on there? So they're responsible for a lot of the administration, who the clients are, what the status is for the application for grants. They apply for grants on behalf of homeless folks, and they also have certain protocols for distributing money and directing people that way. This isn't necessarily as well organized. I was trying to type notes as she was talking, and the conversation wasn't as organized as it could have been. But this past year, there was Washington legislation afforded significant supports to address homelessness. And I didn't realize this. In every real estate transaction, $65 went to homeless concern to prevent or alleviate homelessness, and that has been bumped up from $65 of every transaction to $185 of every real estate transaction. So whenever property is bought or sold, there is built-in taxes to go to homelessness, which I thought was kind of intriguing.
Yeah.
I just didn't realize that was even in there. And the city of Vancouver, specifically, has had a tax to help pay for the care of the homeless and homeless prevention. And so there's going to be a levy to re-up that tax. She mentioned. So it was just trying to understand where different funds come from, and I'm sure Melody would be a great resource if we wanted to know more about the money as well, about where funds are coming from and how they're directed.
Would some of this money go to the overflow, in Vancouver that we looked at, the homeless?
Yeah, so the winter hospitality of overflow is managed through Share House, and so they do work very closely with Share House. That's one of the big.
And so they would get some funding?
Yeah, yeah. So she mentioned kind of the breakdown of what the supports actually look like. So there are 232 year-round shelter beds. So you mentioned the winter hospitality overflow.
Okay.
Obviously there are standing shelters, and I had no idea how many beds there were. So 232. 97 seasonal shelter beds, like winter hospitality overflow. They're working on transitioning the Howard Johnson's by the mall and opening that as an emergency shelter. And she said the plan is to include services. She can go get specific about what those services would be.
Where's that?
Yeah.
The Hojo, yeah, there's by the mall on the east side. There's what is that?
Did
not
you
a
see
Macy's.
Howard Johnson?
Yeah.
I don't ever remember
No,
Howard
me
Johnson.
either.
Big year.
A big yellow, probably a 6-story yellow building. It's not in the mall. It's just across the parking lot from the mall, kind of the southeast side. There was a Penny's where the Penny's is. It's closest to the Penny's,
Oh, okay.
across the parking lot from the Penny's.
And how many people could be in there?
She didn't mention how many beds there would be.
And is that for winter or
For emergency shelter, presumably it would be year round. I'm gathering it's year round, but she mentioned the priority to seniors or people with health issues. So
I think most all of them do
yeah,
have health issues.
yeah. Obviously no health care there, so I'm not sure if those might, if there might be some form of health care involved in those services, whether it be physical health, mental health, dental care. There are so many potential services involved. We didn't get into the breakdown of where those services are available or how extensive. But she mentioned other things that are happening in Clark County. They're working on sanctioned camping sites. I guess they already have some designated areas where people are permitted to camp, rather than having to worry about all their stuff getting uprooted. Because that's been a huge debate in Portland, where they come in and clear out the camps
yeah?
and throw out tarps and tents and throw out people's stuff.
Yeah.
And so then you don't even have a tarp to sleep under. Then what do you do? So having a designated area where people can feel like they're not going to be harassed is maybe helpful in some regard. She mentioned that there are pallet shelters that they're. She didn't go into great description, but she said they're 8x8 rooms with a roof and 2 bunks.
I've seen
40 people per site, including services for these camps.
They have, when you go to a state park, they have somebody that lives at the state park that kind of manages it.
Yeah,
and-
the
and
host.
The
camp-
host, do
camp
they have
host.
people that host these?
I don't know if there's a camp host. My impression, my understanding is that there is a level of oversight. I'm not sure if it's somebody that's staying on, how often they're there. Because you get into things like policing, if
Well,
what
not
if
policing,
somebody-
but, just being there and so that, there's, people don't get taken advantage of, like they talk
Right.
about, that the drugs are coming not just from inside these camps, but that people are coming and victimizing, bringing it in.
Yeah.
Whereas,
Yeah. She mentioned that the Council for the Homeless can provide hotel vouchers for those who are most vulnerable, again, people who are trying to get their health back. Micro home camps, they're kind of a glorified shed, really. And I actually just drove by one, in fact. So Dulcie's coworker Rhonda sits right next to her in the cubicle right next to her, and they've become good friends over the years. Every year for Halloween, we go to Rhonda's neighborhood because it's down in Fruit Valley, and it's this little neighborhood that kind of has grown a little bit, but they're nicer homes in a not so nice neighborhood. There's a little trailer park right there, and they've just put a little development of microhomes for affordable housing. And Rhonda got all excited about this and bought a one of those mini lending libraries, like a little library, and had me assemble it. So I assembled a little library. But it's not officially open yet. It's going to be opened, I think, in 2 weeks. They're having a kind of a launch celebration for
How many
this.
people?
I think there were a dozen units.
Okay.
I don't know how many they plan to have in each unit. But again, it looks just like a bunch of sheds that all lined up there together, and they're very clean and organized, and so that's one of the growing efforts. She mentioned the diversion program, that they work closely with the diversion program to again try to prevent people from getting lost in this, in homelessness, and try to find even short-term options or other care and services that will help keep people from becoming more impacted by their circumstances. If you can get somebody in treatment, and it's their addiction that's the issue, it caused them to lose their family, their job, their home. If you can get them in treatment, and that would be considered definitely a diversion from the path they're on. She mentioned Housing LLC. There's apparently a company that's working on the affordable housing development around Clark County, various developments to try to, again, the cost of housing is a big issue. That's part of what's created such a problem, is people just can't afford to live anywhere. So there's a business that's trying to create affordable houses. My dad got into this a while ago, a number of years ago in Astoria, where my dad got registered as, there are companies online that have the plans, and you order their kit, and the kit shows up and it goes up quick, and so you can tinker with the kit and customize it and all of this. And he said, well, what if we do a really simple version of these houses in Clatsop County to create more affordable housing? And he ran into a lot of red tape and a lot of people saying, not in my backyard. A lot of people said that's a nice idea, but I don't want to encourage poor people living around me, because that's going to bring my property value down. So there's a bit of a fight there, and I know that's even the case in La Center. That one of the contingencies of the housing development here was that they include an apartment complex. So the neighborhood that Carol Lott has moved into, they're now working on the apartment complex. And that multi-family dwelling, as it's considered, it's a different class of housing that makes La Center eligible for additional funding from the state for the school system. Because we have not had multi-family dwellings, we missed out on a bunch of funding, and the school is suffering because of it. So people are mad that our school doesn't have this, doesn't have that. Well, we don't want to pay more taxes to have it. Okay, well, then we're going to have an apartment complex. Either we pay for it ourselves, or we do what we have to do for the state to give us the money. So there's some very bitter arguments and some very nasty comments online about too many people moving in, and where are all these people coming from, and why are we doing this, and this isn't the town that I grew up in. True, but there's a problem. And for this to remain the town you grew up in, that means that a bunch of people are still sleeping in the rain. So how do we care for all these people? The idea of the fairgrounds, I know we've talked about that, the fairgrounds being a place. And in Skamania County, apparently they have been working on that, on the fairgrounds being a possible place for homeless to be sheltered. But they've had a lot of pushback from local residents.
What's NIMBY?
Yeah, what the heck is that?
Not in my backyard.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. The pastor that mentioned that has been part of those conversations, and she was saying, boy, is that a strong sentiment, Yeah, that's too bad for those folks, but I don't want them here. And if we don't allow them, they'll have to go somewhere else. It'll make them someone else's problem. So they get pushed here and pushed there, and they push people out.
Yeah, that's happened in Portland a few times.
Yeah.
Well, because of the global warming, I'm gonna bring that up. And we know that the weather can change very fast and from very hot to very, very cold. And it can do it within hours. And is there any place that people that are homeless like that could go immediately?
Well, that was the very next thing on here, the heating and
Okay.
cooling shelters,
That's where
the
we're
day
at.
shelters, yeah. And, she mentioned that especially this past summer with the heat wave, where we had 170 degrees, absolutely unprecedented heat wave, that there were a number of churches all around Vancouver that opened their doors as, emergency shelters. St. Joe's Catholic, Beautiful Savior Lutheran, St. Paul's Lutheran, those two Lutheran churches are part of the Winter Hospitality Overflow, so they're already have experience with opening their doors to homeless folks. Outside In was another organization I'm not real familiar with. United Methodist Church and Trinity Baptist. So there were a number of churches that provided day shelter. There's some challenges with, just opening your doors. What does that mean? Who's gonna take responsibility for overseeing, who's coming and going and cleaning the building and, is there food involved? Who's going to kick them out? How do you decide how long? So I think it's there are emergency shelters. These were places that just during the most severe weather they were concerned about. Transitional housing was another category of care, and she said there are 88 beds for transitional housing. Janus Youth Center, Open House, Second Step. Share Resident Transition, and Exchange Church. Exchange Church I know is specifically for recovery, and Janus Youth is obviously youth oriented. So there are places that are trying to help a certain population, whether it be a population that, a person that's dealing with addiction issues and a history that way, or whether it be a young person that's trying to escape a bad home life or something like that. How do we help find these folks a place and get them what they need? She mentioned that Clark County is the 8th best county in the nation for rental assistance to landlords. And I thought, 8th in the nation? So Clark County has been really good at rental assistance. So again, you don't give the individual money when they can't pay their rent, you give it to the landlord. So that creates some stability. That creates stability in our county.
The problem is that the list is miles long.
Yep.
And there isn't enough places.
Right. Yep. Yeah, Dulcie was saying that the waiting list for adult family homes, so like 6 people living together with a caregiver that provides your meals and does some basic cleaning and cooking and that kind of thing. The wait list is 6 to 8 months to get into a place. So if somebody is needing that kind of a transition, you got to really plan ahead. And it's really sad that that's the case, but the wait lists are long. My mom is still on a list down in California. She's been dead for a year and a half, and we put her on a list 3 years before she died to move. She's in HUD housing, so subsidized housing, and she wanted to go to a different facility, a different complex, apartment complex. And here, years, almost 2 years after she's dead, she's still waiting. So that shows how many people are on that wait list and how bad the circumstances are, how few facilities are able to accommodate the population in need. So of course, what's causing it? Well, she cited the rising housing costs. We've mentioned, Dulcie and I have said time and again, there's no way we can afford our house today because the property value has gone so high. The only reason we're in the house we're in is because built during the recession. And my builder underbid it at that. And I barely ended up in it because of the recession. But that allowed me a nicer home than I would be in if I had to buy something today. And a lot of people are in that position where the cost of housing has just gone through the roof. And she said during the pandemic, there's been no significant rise in homelessness. That was an interesting fact. Then again, because there was a moratorium for a while on evictions, if somebody couldn't pay the rent, oh well, you're just kind of floating, you're just in limbo. And landlords are stuck with that, unfortunately. And there's been, again, that stimulus money that's helped people out. We've seen a parallel in the food bank, where the food bank has been distributing to fewer people. You would think during this time, there would be more of a need, but that's not what we've seen.
It's just this last month, ours, I mean, we were really busy. We probably had 14 people at least, and in the past, 5, 6,
Starts picking
7.
up again, yeah. Yeah.
But this last month, there was a lot more.
Let's see. So how can churches help? That was kind of our bottom line question. She said, there are churches that have opened shelters. There are churches that give financial support to the General Assistance Fund. She mentioned the General Assistance Fund is kind of like a discretionary fund, where Council for the Homeless can see a need. It doesn't really fit this, doesn't really fit that. I've shared before something like a calling card, to be in touch with a family member and let them know you're still alive, or let them know where you landed, or see if they can help in some way. Calling card costs money. So that would be a kind of a discretionary need that wouldn't fall under emergency services. So that General Assistance Fund is sort of a discretionary, how can we help this person? They said, churches can sometimes give to that to help those funds be available. And bottom line, do what you can. Sometimes it's a matter of letting an RV park in your parking lot for a week while somebody's in transition. But she said, be clear. Be clear on those boundaries, and don't try to take on more than you're ready to take on. I know St. Paul, I heard from the pastor there that opening that church for winter hospitality overflow was controversial. I did not hear necessarily the same from St. Andrew, but it wouldn't surprise me that there are people that, again, I know there's a need, I feel bad for those folks, but I'm not sure I'm ready to share my pew with folks that have been sleeping on the street and smell like they do when they don't have any laundry facilities. So be aware of what you're able to do. We've had periodic calls, maybe once or twice a year, somebody saying, can I park in your parking lot overnight, something like that. Or I used to get them more often, can you help me out with a stay at a motel? I haven't gotten those calls for a while now, I imagine I will now that I've said that. But the tricky one is that I can't, usually, most motels won't take a credit card over the phone. So I have to drive into Vancouver, where I've had to drive down a Mill Plain to show up and show the manager my credit card in order to get somebody a room for the night. So that's been a challenge, because we're not geographically in a place to help with this issue as immediately as some other churches might be.
That's the same thing with our parking lot. For people that we're not close to stores or, resources is part of the problem. Like when they're staying in the Walmart parking lot, they got everything they need.
Yep.
Right there, they go to the bathroom and buy something to
Do
eat.
they still allow that?
She mentioned that, the Walmart parking lot.
They do, yeah.
That's the #1 place,
They still do then?
apparently.
Oh, I thought they didn't.
I thought it had been cut off too,
Me
but.
too. A long time.
And I don't know if that's a Walmart decision or a county decision.
Well, I think it was Walmart, from what I heard.
It used to be, you'd go and there'd be a lot, and then all of a sudden it wasn't there anymore.
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen one.
There was a whole camp a few years ago in the Woodland Walmart. What was that?
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was a big, the traveling hippies. I'm trying to remember
Oh,
what.
yeah, they just come to town for a short time.
Yeah, but
What are they
they
called, not Rainbow, the Rainbow.
okay.
Group, yeah.
But they took over like a quarter of the parking lot
Yeah.
for well over a week, and people were like, "What is this?" Again,
That
they're
has nothing to do with homelessness.
funky. Okay,
That's like a Woodstock for hippies, and
Okay.
it moves around the country.
okay.
And all the people go to it and they just have a great time, and then it gathers another place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it raised a lot of these questions about homelessness, though, and
Yeah,
whether that
yeah.
is an appropriate venue for people to stay overnight.
Yeah. Oh, they were everywhere.
Yeah.
It was really interesting. You always knew them because they had the hippie thing going.
Yeah. And the last advice was be a part of a system. In other words, partner with an agency. We don't need to recreate the wheel. Our food bank, we started out of our church here, and then we realized we should partner with the Oregon Food Bank, because they know what they're doing. They've been doing it a lot longer, they've got a lot of advice, they've got much better resources than we do by ourselves. So her advice was partner. If there's something that we wanna do, figure out an agency that's doing it and work with them to figure out how to work together. She mentioned the fundraiser in October raised $125,000. It was a virtual luncheon. And I'm thinking, a virtual luncheon, having
They mailed their
a
lunch
Zoom
to
meeting.
them?
Yeah, I don't know how that worked exactly.
Give you a recipe, everybody cook the same
Yeah.
thing and eat together?
Yeah,
You just bring your sandwich.
yeah. So I guess they had a guest speaker, and that was kind of the thing, that during the lunch hour, come and log on and
That's
Who
here's
is
a
this
guest
that had
speaker.
that?
The Council for the Homeless hosted this as a fundraising event,
Hmm.
and invited people to give to the Council for the Homeless, and got $125,000, so.
Did we know about it?
I didn't know about it, no. But she mentioned, the website is a great clearinghouse for information. They put out a monthly newsletter. Again, a virtual way is probably the easiest way to access that. The housing hotline number. The dean of the conference took additional notes and actually filled in all those websites, a lot more specific detail about how to access stuff. So, Clark County Council for the Homeless is, would be easy enough to Google and find, but I can certainly get the website if you're interested. So that's what I learned with that. I mean, in terms of what we as a congregation do, I don't know. I remember it was Linda Gwynn, our parish nurse, that really felt like we should get involved with Winter Hospitality Overflow. And I thought, we're so removed from downtown Vancouver, it's going to be a big push to get some of our members to drive in, especially if you're hosting at 3 a.m. The 3 to 6 a.m. I'm like, who's going to want to drive into Vancouver at 3 a.m.? We're not going to do that. So I said, I hear the passion. I want to figure out how to package that, how to encourage people. So I made that our theme for Lent that year, 3 days. We're going to host 3 days, and that Jesus was entombed 3 days. We talked about 3 days for the whole 6 weeks of Lent, gearing toward that volunteering. And I thought, if that's what we need to do to get people involved and mentally geared up to participate, okay. 'Cause, obviously the need is still there. What can we do? Partnering with Winter Hospitality Overflow. That's
Didn't
something
we
we've
just
been
see
doing.
something on that where it's only from like 5 to 8 o'clock, and then they have people hired to handle the rest of the time? Where did I read that?
Yeah, we're
Was
not.
that in our Highland?
It might be in the newsletter. I
In the
think Linda
newsletter, I
Glenn,
think
yeah.
that's where I.
Yeah, they again, because of COVID, the volunteer opportunities are not the same as they used
But I
to be.
think we still can now.
Oh,
And
really?
I think,
They've
I
opened it
thought
up again.
that's, I'll have to go back and
Yeah,
read it.
weren't they saying they just wanted you to bring and drop off food, not?
Yeah.
Well,
Something
that
like
was
Survey, just
that was
drop it
last
off.
year. I think I must have read it, in the, what's it called?
Beacon.
The Beacon. I
Yeah.
must have read it in the Beacon, I
Yeah.
guess, that they now, have it, where, and I don't know if we have a week that we were gonna be set up on.
So from 5 to 8, you're coming, so that
It's
you can
something like that.
serve dinner
So
and
you
everything else.
just
and-
check people in and do that, right, that whole, and then they had people hired to do the rest of the time.
Which would cut down on, yeah.
I still have to be down.
I get the email newsletter from Living Stones, and I know that they're still not allowed to have visitors in the prison to join for their services. But I'm not sure about Winter Hospitality Overflow.
I have a question. Was there anything said about what they may be doing about actually going to camps? Taking food or services to them, or, is there any kind of thing where it goes directly to a camp? Because some of those camps are large. Over there in, like Meadows in Portland, that's a really large,
Yes, I've driven them. I haven't personally driven, but I was in the car when I was driving, drove around, and just huge, miles long of these people. And I'm so concerned about getting the people to the resources.
Right, and that was another question, okay, but how do they get to the gateway?
Yeah.
That's why I was wondering about going to the camps, how do they know
Yeah,
that there's a gateway?
yeah,
Yeah, she didn't get into particulars.
and the resources don't go to them.
I thought
So-
that somebody said that they did, that they would go with like a social worker
No.
and drug.
Yeah,
Person
I said that
visit.
for my little investigation, that they actually, when they go to clean up a can, they take people who know about services, but didn't seem to, there was no specifics about how often is that working or anything. But they do take them to the camp. And they also said something that you didn't, was contradictory, was when they clean up a camp, they don't throw away that stuff.
Hmm.
They do keep it
The personal stuff of people, they keep it.
until they're claimed.
Yeah, that's what they said, so
Oh.
there's a lot of stuff they do throw away, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
I know.
But if it's personal things, I think they do keep
Yeah.
it.
And I don't know where or for how long, but.
It's a tricky thing, because you think about, trash is a huge problem. Waste is a huge problem.
Yeah.
But, so, getting, a trash container that's picked up all the time, is one thing to do, but then, I don't know.
And here is why I had that dream. I had this dream, and I don't know where it came. I believe it came from God. And the people are being moved constantly and losing stuff and what have you. If the fairgrounds was open and they were all camping there, and not just, it would be just temporary camping until they can find some, whatever is needed, but the resources could be there also.
On site.
And not only would the grounds be available to those with tents and those that needed a roof over their head, but also those with RVs and cars and what have you would be placed for them too, and the resources right there.
Just like a refugee camp.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah, and that dream was so vivid. I had to bring it up because that would take care of everything, emergencies and everything, but it would take care of the resources, seeing each one of those people as they needed to be seen and getting them to the places they wanted to be, that they needed to be at. And as people come in, they go out. They come in, go out. And it wouldn't be a permanent place for them, but it'd be permanent until a resource was placed them in where they want to be. And that's what I've been preaching, shall we say. And I'm still doing it. I'm still doing it.
There's some dark sides where our assumption is everybody wants to have a place.
Yeah.
And we're kind of, we're assuming that, nobody wants to live that way, but there are people that do wanna live that way. There are people that would rather live on the street. My wife's dad, before he died, was a vet counselor. Since Vietnam, he came back and became a vet counselor. He said, never, ever give money to somebody who's holding a sign says they're a vet. There are services available for vets. The only reason that they're not getting the services and getting the care they need and looking for handouts is because they refuse the treatment, because you need to be in treatment of some kind. You don't even need to be clean, but you need to be pursuing treatment.
Yeah.
And so they're refusing to get clean or making a choice. They'd rather stay addicted and not even make any effort to try to improve their circumstances.
When you're done with that, I'll tell you what the information.
Yeah,
The
please.
program, it is in our beacon, and it was written by the lady.
Linda Glenn.
Joy is her name.
Oh.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, Joy Galt. And I can only see a piece of it here. Volunteers needed 5:50 to 8:30 PM each day. And you will be setting up coffee, juice, meal, and rolling the silverware. We need 2 volunteers per shift. And somewhere along here it said they would like churches to sign up for 3 or 4 consecutive days. And they have somebody, it's through the Outsiders Inn. They're partnering with them, and they're providing the supervision for the rest of the time. So the churches are just doing this one piece, and it tells you the items to donate, and you guys probably all have this beacon, right? Did you get it
I did.
online? Okay, there she's got a whole,
Yeah,
uh,
it was on my.
yeah, I always get it online, but, yeah. So that's,
So they are opening like they used to in a way.
yes, and you have to wear a mask the whole time, yes, exactly. And you can still, go to, talk to the Outsiders Inn to, donate food anytime that you want. And they tell you there's a website that you should go to, and, yeah, so, and I was just assuming that, Linda, I'm sure she's aware of this, and I was just thinking she was probably gonna coordinate this for our church again, as she's
Sign us
the
up.
one that
I've
she
seen
was
Linda a
doing.
long time, what's going on?
I think she's more cautious with COVID.
Yes, that's what
I think that's a big part of it. She's been on the task force, and given her background in the hospital, she's very cautious. And the fact that and again, going by the numbers, and
There's a lot of nurses don't wanna get the vaccine.
I know, yeah.
It's weird.
We had the memorial here Saturday, and probably a quarter of the people weren't masking. And I thought, I don't want to be the mask police, especially not to people who've come to grieve. That doesn't feel very welcoming or appropriate, but at the same time,
maybe you
public
should talk to
safety
us.
is, it's just, it's tricky. So I think that,
Triple vaccinated, I think most of us are here, right?
Yeah.
I can't get my 3rd till December,
Okay, but,
Well,
but
I
you're
think
in the safe
so
zone.
I'll be old enough by then.
Oh.
That's the trick here.
Oh, okay.
My one daughter told me 62, but I researched it, it said 65. So, I already hit 65.
Boys are
Well, I
supposed to
know
be this
that there's
Thursday.
money, and I know that there's plans, and, you know, for some good things to happen for them. I'm talking like tomorrow. This is winter time now. Anything could happen. What do they wait till the winter gets here and to say, well, we haven't got any place for them?
Well, they have places, but just not enough of them, or not enough people
Yeah,
coming.
there isn't enough.
If they
Yeah,
have,
there's some things that it's an overnight stay, but
and they do, like when they
That's
have, I'm
all.
thinking about when they had the fires and stuff, like they opened up school gymnasiums, hotels actually opened up and let the people displaced by the fires move into the hotel, so assuming if we had, like they said, suddenly it's
and
going to be
that's what I'm
10
looking
degrees
for.
below 0, then they'd start opening up gymnasiums, and they'd
Yeah.
start, hotels would
That's
open
what
their
I'm,
doors.
that's what I'm looking for, because I wanna hear that that's a possibility.
I think they do that already and have been for years.
Well, you know, it's surprising, I know you don't wanna hear it while people will step in, but you know, it's surprising what people will do. I read a lot about those fires, and there were people, and regionally here too, that immediately got a hold of people and said, we'll take your horses. You know, there's people that went and trip after trip after trip to get their livestock out of the fire zone. And they had, I think, one of the stores in Woodland was allowing horse trailers with the horses in them.
You're right, yes.
So I
But
do
this is a
think
different
people
story.
do.
Those are people that have homes and nice places.
That have resources and pay
And
taxes and,
exactly.
yeah.
These are people, we're talking about people that are
But they still do open emergency places.
Yeah, they don't.
I mean, you have that on
They
your
don't check
list,
you in
and
and say
you
you
hear
have to
it,
have
you hear
this
it
or that.
every time we have hot or cold weather, or, you know, we hear those places, the
But
emergency
they're just
shelters.
overnight
being-
places, they're just overnight things. And I'm talking about a long enough stay that the resources right there with them, getting them to the help they really need. And it's not just a nighttime, one night or 2 nights, something like that. It's long enough to get them to the resources they really need.
You know, the WHO program does that in a way that they have a counselor there, I think, all the time. And she meets with the individuals, and then,
You're talking at who?
at the WHO program, yeah, you've seen that. And since, you know, they work up a whole package of exactly what you're talking about, of help. And in the morning, if they weren't going to work, they were going to a place where they were giving them vocational help, or they had things for everybody. There was nobody just hanging out on the
Well, a
street.
surprising number of them worked.
You know,
When I stayed the night there,
it
people
was
that were getting
almost,
5 o'clock.
almost all of it.
Ride their bike to work.
It was almost all. You know, there was only 2 or 3 maybe that really weren't working, and, you know, if they were working, they just couldn't afford a place to live.
Well, a good example of people, communities not being ready for these kinds of things is the border. Look at what happened at the border. Think about what happened at the border. All of those people came rushing in, and their children were taken away from them, and they were living in absolute squalor.
And still are, I mean, I don't know, I don't see anything about that on the news. What's happening to
No,
those
they don't.
people when they get to the wall? Whatever.
You know what
I
Eric's,
mean,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I know if they go through the process, you know, there'll be a process, but what do they do?
There's a lot of, what I hear is a lot of talk about what we should do and what we aren't doing.
Although you've gotta have the structure set up, cause like what Eric was saying about his mom, and I've seen this too, is that if you bring these people there and then you want to disperse them, you've gotta have the facilities to disperse them to, so it seems to me then, at a grassroots level, you're gonna have to work to get more affordable housing, because otherwise, what's the point? You're just gonna, if you can't
Yeah,
take
all
and
of that has
send
to
them
be
all
done.
out, then you've got them all at the, and what, then
All
what,
of
you know,
that
they'll
has
be,
to be
what,
done.
3-4 years at the fairgrounds? It doesn't, you know, it doesn't work, it's gotta be affordable housing.
All of it has to be done. The fairgrounds is just an intimate time to bring the resources and them together safely
Yeah.
and cleanly, because the fairgrounds has electricity and everything. They can have heat, they can have warmth and cleanness. There's water running, and there's bathrooms, there's garbage disposal, everything there to keep it a clean and decent place, and with some supervision, and with resources there to work with those people over a period of time to get them to the low-cost housing that's being built and so forth. All of it needs to happen.
Well, I got the impression from what I was reading is that this council wants everything to go through them. Like if you're donating stuff, there's a place to donate and all that. But I was wondering, like if somebody said grassroots, is it not
I don't-
nice to go to camps and take food and, I mean, just to serve a meal, or?
I don't think they're trying to control anything. I think they're just trying to coordinate, trying to connect
Yes,
people that,
I
you know,
understand that.
yeah.
So number-wise, do they have any idea about how many people are not getting any services? I mean, it
I
sounds
didn't-
like you've got this, and this
Yeah.
going on.
They do the point in time survey, you know, the annual
Okay.
survey,
Once
but
once
I
a
didn't
year.
get the
I
specific
even
numbers.
went on one.
Oh, you did?
I did.
Yeah.
Not just once, but several times up in Spanaway.
And when
We
they,
went out and checked every place that we could find in Spanaway where we knew that there were campers, and interviewed them and talked to them. And, there was a lot more than they ever thought.
Hmm.
A lot more. And,
so when they do that, what do they do with that? It just,
Yeah,
it gives
good
them an
question.
idea of,
When they see what the flow is, what, you know,
Well, I
but
think-
it's such a transit group, like, it seems like, you know, when you change so quickly.
come on, man, I needed this an hour ago. Thank you.
Oh,
so
so
you
you
need
messages.
doll.
So sweet, thank you,
Yes,
darling.
you're welcome. Maybe the boys
Thank you so
will
much.
Oh.
chocolate.
You can have a
That got
little
cat.
I guess so.
Well, thank you.
Well, Stevenson is doing the fairgrounds, so maybe we should ask them.
what's that?
Stevenson is doing